So we're going to finish out this round of videos by talking about the masking tool. Okay, so that's this tool here to the right. I'm actually going to skip the red eye tool because I don't think you really need it at all. Okay, so we're going to talk about the masking tool. And just because we're working with black and white images, I'm going to go ahead and change this image to black and white first. Okay, so now we're in black and white, and I'm going to go back to the original aspect ratio as well. Okay. So why would you use the masking tool? Well, with your images, as we have kind of talked about already, the image that you take from the camera onto your computer to edit in Lightroom Classic is considered your raw material. So largely, you're never really going to see an image go out into the world without it being manipulated in some way. And you can see here already that we already changed this to black and white, so the image is going to be different from the original. We talked about exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, your blacks and your whites. Okay, so those are all going to be adjustments that you make with your image in order to enhance it. But burning and dodging really is one of the most powerful things you can do to an image, because what it's going to do is going to allow you to darken and lighten different parts of the image selectively. And what this allows you to do is really force the viewer's eye into certain parts of the image to make them pay attention to the areas that you want them to pay attention to, okay? And so this basic rule of our eye going to the lightest areas, burning and dodging is going to really allow you to choose which areas are dark, choose which areas are light, and make your viewer engage with your image. So if I were to click on the masking tool, right away you have these options, okay? So you're going to have add new mask. You have select subject, so these are kind of presets, right? So if you use these, it'll decide for you what it's going to mask off. So we have the subject here, we have the sky, and then down here we have brush, the linear gradient, the radial gradient. And then we also have color range, luminance range, and depth range. What I'm going to show you today is going to be brush, linear gradient, and radial gradient. I find that I use these the most, okay? We're not working with a color image right now, so this is not going to be applicable. And I'm not going to show you the luminance range, but I think you can do everything you need to do with the brush, the linear gradient, and the radial gradient, okay? But just to show you what's going to happen if you were to use these subject select and sky select, I'm going to hit subject select first, and it's going to think a little bit, and it's going to determine what it thinks the subject is and what you want to mask. Okay, so what Lightroom thought were the subjects in this particular photograph was the Tarot brand logo and the signpost. Now, yeah, maybe I'll want to do some work on those later on, but maybe not. And so for now, I'll just leave that selection here because, yeah, maybe I will want to do some work on it, okay? So what's nice about this current version of Lightroom is that you can work on different layers, okay? So you can see here that I can save this one by not really doing anything to it, and I can just hit the plus sign. And what that's going to do is going to allow me to make another layer so that I can keep these kind of saved layers to work on, okay? So I'm going to now hit sky, and let's see what that does. So you can see now that we're on a new mask, okay? So we have our first mask here, and we have our other mask here. This is the sky. And this can be useful. Like in this image, we do actually have a pretty defined sky area. So again, we're going to keep this, and maybe we'll do some work on it later on. So again, I'm going to hit plus because I want to show you the other tool. So now I'm going to go to brush. And if you remember back to our spot removal video. So you have the size, basically changing the size of the brush. You have the feather, which changes the hardness of our stroke. We have the flow, which is a new one, and what flow does is it kind of acts as, when you kind of think this as like pressure, right? So the amount of pressure you put down when you're making a brush stroke determines how much of whatever you're applying to the surface is going to be put on there. Okay, so the flow is going to be how much of the brush is going to be used. And then you have the density here, and the density works a lot like opacity. Okay. You also have this auto mask option, which is going to allow Lightroom to determine what it thinks you're trying to mask off. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. I'll kind of show you as we go along, okay? And then under here, you're going to have your adjustments. So this looks very much like the Basics tab under the Develop module, okay? So just to show you here what this will do, I'm just going to leave it as is, and then I'm just going to click right here in the middle, okay? So you're going to see that whatever is being masked off is going to be red, okay? So right now the flow is almost, it's 57. If I were to increase it and I do that again, you'll see that our mark is a lot harder, okay? It's quite feathered, right? So you see from the middle out, it's really soft. If I were to make this a really hard edge and I click, you'll see that our circle is going to be a lot more defined, okay? And let's see, I'll put the density down too, and I'll do the same thing here. Okay, you can see that the amount that is being applied is a lot less. Okay, so going down, you'll see here that we have our adjustments. So these red areas indicate the areas that are masked off, and these are going to be the areas that are affected by our adjustments down here. And what you're going to see is I'm going to use the exposure first, and when I engage the slider, the red marks disappear, and as I move the exposure down, you can see that these circles are getting darker, okay? And we refer to this darkening of specific parts of the image as burning in or burning, okay? So if I were to go in and select different areas to darken, I would call that burning in that area. And you'll see how these work here when I go through the image. If I were to then take the exposure up and lighten these areas, okay, this is what we refer to as dodging. Dodging meaning that we're lightening specific areas of the image, right? So this term comes from when in the darkroom, when you're blocking light, you're dodging the light away from the image, so you're allowing the image to get lighter in particular areas, okay? So this is not what we would do to this image. I'm just kind of showing you how these things work so that you have an idea of what to encounter when you start using them, okay? So you can also control the contrast, right? So again here, this might not be the best area for contrast, but you can see as I move this up and down, the contrast is changing. Highlights you can change. Again, this area not the best, right? Because it's kind of a middle gray. You have control of your shadows. You have control of your whites and your blacks, okay? You have texture and clarity here, which I don't use too often. I'm really more concerned with exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, all this kind of stuff. Okay. You can play with the temperature and the tint, and because we're working from we're working from a color image now in black and white, this will have a bit of adjustments available. So I'm going to delete this because I don't think that we are going to use these. Okay, so I just right clicked and I'm going to delete mask 3. Okay. So again, this is our subject, this is our sky. I'm going to now show you the linear gradient. Okay. And what the linear gradient does is it kind of uses one line as your marker, and then there's a gradient from wherever that line begins. Okay, so if I were to pull this way, you can see that the red area is masked out. Okay, and I can go in and make adjustments as I need to. So go back to this line here, and this will allow you to affect the feather. Okay, so if you pull this out, it kind of makes the feather a little bit softer. You can extend this so you can see that that feathered area here gets soft. You can pull this down, or you can rotate this so you can change the angle that the gradient comes from. Okay, so it just depends on what you're trying to do to the image. So let's say, I don't know, something like that. And again, we have control over exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows. Okay, so if I pull this down, you can see that now I'm darkening up the ground here. Maybe adding a bit more contrast. Maybe pulling up the highlights, whites, opening the shadows a little bit. So you have all these things at your disposal, okay? And what I'll do is I'll go through this image as a full edit in another video, just so you can see how I'm actually going to use these in conjunction with one another. Okay, we'll call it done. So now I'm going to show you the radial gradient. Okay, so this one's going to act like a circle. So again, we have all the same kind of tools here at our disposal. The thing that you have available to you here is feathering. So this tool, what it does is it kind of creates a circle or an oval, which is going to mask out particular areas of the image. Okay, so if I were to pull this down, you can see that we have this red circle here. Again, that's the masked area. Okay, so this area within here is the part that's going to be adjusted. If I were to change the feather, does it change it live? Yeah, so it changes it live, which is nice. Okay, so I can make my mark and then adjust the feather as needed. Okay, and then something else that I think is really cool about the radial gradient, and you also have this with the linear gradient too, is this invert. Okay, so you can then click on this and it'll switch what is being selected for the mask. Okay, this is, I think radial gradient is good if you want to throw a quick vignette on something, even though there is a vignette option in the develops tab. This is kind of a way that you can really adjust what's being vignetted. And you can make this inner circle bigger too, right? So if I were to pull this out, you can see that I'm changing the diameter of the inner circle, which is deselecting more of the image, right? You can also oblong this to make it more oval. Okay, so pulling this out, pulling this down, okay? And then from there, you can make your adjustments. So let's say, for example, I do want to vignette this. I'm just going to go ahead and pull the exposure down so that you get this like vignette around the image, okay? That's a little drastic, but you get the idea. You can switch between your masks, which is really nice, okay? If you double click on these, any of the masks, you can name them, which is good because sometimes it gets really confusing about what you're working on. So let's say, for example, I wanted to label this, I could label this sky. And you could also label what you did to it, right? So let's say sky, I'm gonna burn the sky. So I'm gonna hit okay. I'm now on this one and I'm just gonna take this guy down just a little bit, right? Okay. Here we can double click on this one and it would be mask one, and this is our subject. So I can say sign and street sign right there. And then if we wanted to make our adjustments, let's say we wanted to increase this because we wanted to pop, so we're pulling the exposure up. which is kind of, that's a bit too much. Okay, something like that, I don't know. Again, I'm not necessarily doing this with a lot of intention, I'm just showing you what you can do, okay? And then you could go in and label these other ones as well. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how you use these tools and the way they work. And in the next video, I'm going to take you through kind of a whole edit of an image to see just how intentional you can be with these tools. Okay, so I'm going to hit done here. And really quickly, you can see with this comparison what we did from beginning to now, right? We changed the color, did all this stuff with burning and dodging, all right? So that's it for the masking tool, and I'll see you in the next video.